Hello, year three. I hope you're well and looking forward to our new topic in history. So, today we're going to start thinking about this new topic, and this new topic is Egyptians and the ancient Egyptian era. We're going to think about when it was as our main focus today, and we're going to compare it to other periods in history to see if we understand when they were as well. To be successful within today's session, you can understand when other historical events have occurred. So look at your previous historical knowledge. You're going to identify when the Egyptian period was compared to these. You're going to know and understand what BCE and AD mean, and you're going to order some events during and since the time of ancient Egypt. Okay, so there's those elements, and if you feel at the end of it like you've got those, you'll be successful. So well done. Okay, we're going to think a little bit about some of the language that we use when we talk about Egyptians and actually ancient Egyptians. So, ancient means something that existed a long time ago in the past. Sorry, I'll just move me away from those words. And ancient Egyptian is a phrase we hear a lot about that time and period. So it's not recent past. It's really old, a long time ago. Now, what I'd like you to do, if you look at this picture, is you're going to try and think about how you could sort these images in this picture between those that are ancient and those which are modern. So there's some nouns, so some things in this picture. There's a gentleman, a bike, a Bible, which is indicative of the period when Christians believe Jesus was alive. There's a pencil, and when that was invented, there's a car and a television. Okay, so you've got to sort these things into ancient and modern things. And the real center of the target, that yellow dot, is our most ancient, so the most old items, the really old items. Pause the video while you think about that. Okay, guys, hopefully you've got the idea that in terms of time, the gentleman, although he might be old, it's very healthy for an old gentleman, but he might be comparatively old, even older than me, but he is only 80 years old. So in terms of history, that's not that old. The bicycle, less than 200 years ago, the Kirkpatrick Macmillan pedal bicycle was invented. Less than 100 years ago, John Logie Baird invented the television. So in that darker blue circle, we can see those more modern discoveries. The Bernacottes invented the wooden pencil less than 560 years ago. So in that lighter blue. The car, well, the first thing known as a car was a steam-powered trolley, which was less than 500 years ago. So all of these things are less than 500 years ago. A truly long time ago, nearly ancient, would have been the Bible, which was written between 1400 BC and AD 90. Now, AD and BC we'll talk about in a minute. That means that most people think more than 1900 years ago. Okay, so more than 1,900 years ago would be AD 90. Okay, so that's when people think that the Bible was most recently created. Okay, now there's some words that we've used there, but to go back to this, we can see 1400 BC and AD 90 for when the Bible was written. Now, BC means before Christ. Anything that happened before the year AD 1 is before Christ, BC. Okay, so anything that happened, and that symbolizes the time where Christians identify as Jesus having been born. Okay, so BC means before Christ. Before Christ. AD is an abbreviation. An abbreviation is a shortened version of a Latin phrase. So Latin was a language that some people still speak today because they learn it. However, it is not widely spoken. Hundreds of years ago, it was widely spoken in much of the world, especially in Europe. So AD is an abbreviation, a shortened version of this Latin phrase, which means Anno Domini, which means in the year of the Lord. So Anno Domini, we can see Anno Domini. Okay, and that means the period after the birth of Jesus, according to Christians. Now, some people, whether it because they are not a person of faith or just because it's how they prefer to use it, such as scientists and geographers, instead of BC, they sometimes say BCE, before the Common Era. Okay, so BCE, and that's synonymous, means the same as BC. Okay, so it could have BCE. Okay, so those are some points of vocabulary. So anything that the period which is the furthest in the past would be the BC and BCE period. AD, we are currently in the year 2021, so 2021 AD. 2021 AD. We are currently in the period AD. Anno Domini. Okay, guys. Now, really simple thing. We just have a quick look at a map, see if we can identify which continent and where Egypt would be in the map. If you put your finger on the screen, great. Now we'll see in a second if you're correct. Hopefully all of you can identify that in the center of the map, we can see Britain. To the right-hand side of the map, so the east, we can see Russia in the northeastern section. To the left-hand side of the map, to the top, we can see North America, so Canada and America. And then bottom left, we can see South America. Bottom right, we can see Australia and Southeast Asia. In the center, in the bottom half in the center, we can see Africa. And to the northern tip of Africa, we can see Egypt. Okay. This is where Egypt is. It was in ancient Egyptian times and it still is now. Now we know where Egypt is, we can hopefully identify when the Egyptians were the dominant civilization within the planet. Okay. We're going to think first of all about some things we already know. So if you remember at the beginning of the session, we talked about how we try and identify our historical knowledge already so we can compare when Egyptians were to them. So in 3100 BC, so more than 3,000 years before essentially 1 AD, so more than 5,000 years ago, King Menes united, so brought together two Egyptian kingdoms, and they built an empire that lasted for more than 3,000 years until just before 1 AD. So it lasted for 3,070 years when the Romans took over. We'll look at their takeover in a few minutes. Now, that time period might feel like it's completely abstract to us and we don't understand it. However, you know something about history already. Your work with Miss Tapper last term, what can you remember studying in history? What did you learn about? It linked to your science topic of rocks. Lots of you having a look now. Hopefully you can remember. Some of you now spotting, yeah, you learned about the Iron Age. Now, the Iron Age was approximately 3,000 years ago, so about 2,800 years ago. However, the period of ancient Egypt started before and finished after that period. Okay, so you can see how long ancient Egypt was the ruling civilization in that area. Okay. Now, within that period, initially, hieroglyphics were used 5,000 years ago. It's a way of recording things and a way that some people communicated. And people wrote on these papyrus plants, and we'll look at these later in the unit. The city of Memphis was built, and it was only a capital city for 770 years, which to me seems quite a long time. But in those 3,000 years that the Egyptians were the premier civilization, it was not the capital city for all that time. Okay, it means white walls. Okay, and the main god of Memphis was Ptah, the creator god and the god of craftsmen. One of the most famous things about ancient Egypt is the pyramids. The first one was created approximately 5,000 years ago. Okay, but the most famous ones were created more recently than that. So some of the most famous ones were only created 4,000 or 4,500 years ago. So the first one, if we look back at that one, that was standing for more than 500 years before the other ones were created. Okay, that's a long time they've been there. Okay, and these ones are now the Great Pyramids, which were created about 4,000 or 4,200 years ago. Okay, and they're 5 miles from the River Nile. They're huge, and we'll look at them as well as we go through the unit. Okay. The Kingdom of Egypt was divided between the north and the south. Okay, about 4,000 years ago, it was ruled in the north by Memphis and in the south by Thebes. Okay, and this unrest, this division, this lasted for more than 150 years. So it was a long time. Eventually, though, Mentuhotep II reunited, so brought it back together. So approximately 3,500 years ago, this was reunited. Okay, and they learned a lot about technology. Now, there were rulers, about 3,500 years ago from Western Asia. And there was lots of people who tried, as it happened a lot within lots of civilizations, to attack and take over the area of Egypt. Okay, and they had to fight them off. But some people did settle, and with them, they brought some new information and some new technology. So these people who immigrated, so moved to Egypt from Palestine, which is now in the area in Asia called the Middle East. Okay. Now, the rulers of Egypt around 3,000 years ago were people called pharaohs. Okay, most of them were male, and most of them were male. There was a female. One of the few females was called Hatshepsut, but then most of the male ones were famous ones called people like Tutankhamun and Ramesses II. They were very famous, very very powerful people. Tutankhamun was in charge for 10 years, finishing about 3,500 years ago. He became king became ruler pharaoh when he was 8 years old. Okay, and some people think he died when he was 18 because a hippo attacked him. In 1922, his tomb, so where he was buried, was found intact, and some archaeologists discovered this. We'll look at Howard Carter and that in our next lesson. Okay? Probably the most famous one of the pharaohs. Eventually, Egypt was conquered by the Nubians, okay, and they came from an area of Africa which is now somewhere between Egypt and Sudan. Okay, and lots of the people and the culture of the Nubians remain. Then, eventually, the people from the area now known as Iran, Persia, led by Cambyses II, defeated the Egyptian armies and took over. Because of the power of Egypt, people wanted to take over control. There was then a Greek battle called Alexander a Greek leader called Alexander the Great who took over. So lots of people took over, but the empire remained. Okay? And the Egyptian people were happy because they did not like being ruled by the Persians, the Iranians. Then Ptolemy was appointed the governor. So Ptolemy took over to take care of the area until they decided on a new pharaoh. Okay, and that was approximately 2,400 years ago, 2,320 years ago. Okay, and eventually, because he was good at looking after things, he became the ruler. So it became Ptolemy. Okay, and it's one of the most famous ones. Now, 2,300 years ago, something called the Rosetta Stone was carved. So it was cut, and this was really important for understanding those hieroglyphic bits of writing that had been done before. And we'll have a look at those, the Rosetta Stone, as we go through the unit as well. Cleopatra was a very famous person. Some of you might have heard of her. She was one of the most famous pharaohs, mainly because she was a female, but she was in charge for 27 years. She had a son who was called Julius Caesar. You may have heard of him. Eventually, the Roman Empire took over the Egyptian Empire in 30 BC. So 2,150 years ago, the Romans took over, led by somebody called Octavian, the Egyptian Empire, and that became then part of the Roman Empire, and that was when the Egyptian Empire ended. Now, some work for you to do, guys. I've been trying to print some information out for you, but it's all gone a bit wrong. So, all my information sheets for you have got a bit mixed up. Now, the dates on these they're the right dates for the events in the boxes, but they're not in the right order. So, what I'd like you to do is get some scissors, cut these out, and then draw a line, and then put these in the correct order on the line. Now, it might feel a bit tricky because if you remember, our BC dates are almost in the wrong order. So if we look at 1539 BC, that's actually something that occurred before a smaller value of 51 BC. Because the smaller the BC value, the closer to today we are. So 0 BC would be the closest BC value we could have to today. And you notice as well that some of these are empty. So we've got 1799, 20 something AD, and 2021. And I was hoping that maybe by doing a bit of research with your knowledge organizer, you might be able to identify what could go there. Now, 2021 is this year. Could you write down what you think might happen this year? 20 something AD, I was wondering if maybe you could write down when you were born and write down a bit of information about you on that one. And then on the 20